Hello and welcome to this month's edition of Plenty in 20. This month it is called 15 Causes of Ineffective Performance Appraisals and the Solutions. Nearly long enough to fill the 20 minutes on its own. So today is going to be very much around, not so much around skill building, it's not even around how to set up a performance review in your whole structure and framework, although we'll touch on both of those. It's sort of that middle ground. It's the general approach that we take to them that tends to make them ineffective and some ways to overcome that. So we're going to cover 15. You'll already see from that it's going to be punchy because we're going to spend maybe 1 minute on each of them. First thing is, what is a performance review? Well, the definition we're going to use today is it's something along the lines of a formal discussion, so it's not just a casual chat, to reflect on the past performance period. Now, what I mean by that is it doesn't necessarily have to be a year, and that's going to be elaborated on in one of the tips. And it's to review or to reflect on that past performance period and to plan future development. If you're doing appraisals for other reasons, then potentially that's one of the causes for them not being as effective as you would like. So let's get into the 15 tips. And the first of the 15 is actually around doing those appraisals for the wrong reasons. So if you're saving up feedback to give to someone at their performance review, that's not the intention. In fact, that's a problem. Someone's been working without that feedback for a week, a month, 3 months, 6 months, however long it's been in your notes waiting for the performance review. So really what we want to do is give immediate feedback. We want the performance appraisal to be the time at which we review the year or the period as a whole, and we'll cover that more in the next tip. If it's also a tick and flick, it's something we've got to do. We've just got to say we've done it, then they're not going to be effective. And in fact, if that's the reality, if they're mandated, but they mean nothing more in your organisation than that, this webinar is not going to provide you with solutions, because the problem is in the way they're approached and no doubt the structure that they have if they're mandated and simply a matter of tick and flick. If they're designed to be a genuine development process, then this webinar is going to be gold for you. So if they are to improve performance and promote growth, then you're doing them for the right reason. Let's move on to problem number 2, and that's around the wrong frequency. So very often we see performance appraisals, performance reviews, you'll hear us use those terms interchangeably. We see them scheduled every 12 months because that's what it says in the book. And I think that's a mistake. I think people need different frequencies of review. So I think you should have multiple frequencies even within one program. So I'm not suggesting organisations choose to have 3, 6 or 12 months as their frequency. I'm suggesting as a leader, you choose the frequency based on the person. So someone who's really highly competent, doing really well, in a great place, and assuming that you've got lots of other ways to check in with them, 12 months might be fine. Someone who's struggling a bit more, needs a bit more guidance, 6 months. And someone who might be new, there might be performance issues, there might be behavioural issues, then I would suggest every 3 months. It raises accountability and it allows more frequent formal check-ins. So don't take a one-size-fits-all. And a bonus tip here is think about doing probation appraisals. So when you've got people, that first 6 months is so critical, I would be doing appraisals during that. So potentially one right at the beginning, which is really about goal setting, one in the middle, which is around evaluating progress, and one about a month before, where you're really looking at, is probation going to be extended, or is this person not really a fit for you? Moving on to tip 3, and that's misunderstanding how appraisals should look and feel. And you'll see the crossed out text there. That's not a mistake. If you're doing them as a top-down assessment from manager to employee, they're not going to work effectively. People will dread them. They'll walk up the corridor, they'll make gallows jokes like, oh, I'm in trouble, or, well, it's been nice working with you. And while they're joking, it's an insight into the way people are feeling about appraisals. So they should be a performance-related discussion between two people who give each other feedback. Now, don't obsess about the two. Sometimes you might have an extra person in there, depending upon your structure, but it should be two-way feedback in which both the team member and their leader have the opportunity to give each other feedback, reflect, and improve performance over the next 12 months. The next mistake people make is the wrong time, the wrong place. Appraisals are not a quick hit. You can't, if you're doing them poorly and if you're ticking and flicking. But if you're genuinely having a discussion that reflects and allows feedback both ways, they can't be squeezed into 15 minutes. They can't be interspersed by other work. I don't care how busy your work environment is. And I've worked in some very on-the-floor busy environments. You need to find time away from the busyness where you can have a genuine conversation. You should be doing that more than just with appraisals. I get with other discussions they might be shorter, but the appraisal, you need to allow at least an hour. You might be quicker, but you need to allow at least an hour. And rethink power dynamic environments where, the boardroom where people feel intimidated, or across the desk. You might do it in your office, but come around and sit beside them so that, as I say, you're removing that power dynamic. The next one is that the mistake is that only having one performance discussion all year. And again, this goes back to the saving things up for reviews. A performance management framework should include a series of discussions which, on the job, should be really frequent. Micro chats, micro feedback, micro coaching, micro praise. All of those things can happen in really quick on-the-job environments, but also some regular off-the-job catch-ups. And if you're in a busy on-the-floor type of environment, they might be short, but they should be opportunities to check in and hear a bit of feedback from each other, deal with things that you can't deal with on the floor. The premise or the basic rule for a performance appraisal is they shouldn't hear anything at the review they don't already know, unless it happened today or yesterday. Mistake number 6 is that they're poorly planned. You absolutely can't wing this. You need to spend some time thinking about the discussion you want to have. If you wing it, you'll end up missing critical points. You'll also end up skewing the feedback. So you'll talk about everything they're getting right and maybe not focus on the areas for development, or vice versa, which is really unfair. Now, critically, they can't wing it either. So I think you need to have a framework that you use to help prepare. I've got one I use that I list things in certain categories, but I also give them questions to get them thinking about the review and the sort of conversations they want to have. And I'll allude to one or two of those later, but the very obvious ones are around, reflect on your year, what's gone well, or reflect on the last 3 months, the last 6 months. What's gone well? What would you like to address? What would you like to improve? So give them the opportunity to plan. Number 7 mistake is that one-dimensional appraisal where we're focusing on only one half of what makes someone a good team member. So we have a framework we use where we evaluate people based upon their technical and task performance, but also their team and cultural fit. If we've got a really highly competent person, someone who's really good at the task, but maybe doesn't do the right thing sometimes with their colleagues, that's a discussion we have. And I think you've got to think about both as part of your planning process. And during the discussion, if they're not having insights about both, then you might need to guide them towards that. Mistake number 8 is not appraising everyone. So it's when only the frontline are appraised, it reinforces that message that this is a top-down tool. And I've deliberately used the word inflicts on the workers. That's the perception people have of appraisals, And we have to break that. We have to do more to help them see it's a really positive developmental process when it's done well. It's a two-way process. So I'm a big believer in cascading this down. I think the CEO should be having appraisals with the executive should be having appraisals with their managers, etc., throughout the organisation. It's too much for a manager to do, as we'll talk about on the next slide, but we need to cascade that down. I think it should be clear to everyone that the CEO is also having an appraisal, and that might come from a board, it might come from whoever appointed them. Potentially, it comes from another source that we'll cover on a subsequent slide. Number 9 mistake is a lack of skill and training. As I said on the previous slide, it's too much for one manager to do properly, to do every appraisal. So if you've got 40 people in a team, which is so not a huge organisation, you think about the load for one person to do every appraisal. As an organisation gets bigger, it just becomes more and more impossible. So you have to have this cascading approach where the direct supervisor is involved in giving or doing an appraisal with their team members. Now, that's not only spreading the load, that person directly experiences the team member in the workplace and is really well placed to give feedback. Sometimes you might have the next level manager up, you might have someone from people and culture supporting that manager, particularly if they're learning the process. So that could be part of developing their skill and training. But you need to train managers in both the appraisal framework, in the sorts of attitudes and approaches we're talking about today, but also in so many critical skills that they will need, not only for appraisals, but also for everyday development of their people throughout the entire year. So that can be around how to set expectations, how to give feedback, influencing skills, emotional intelligence, so being able to manage themselves well during the appraisal discussion, and also help to manage the other person's emotions, particularly if they're becoming defensive. They need good questioning skills, good coaching skills, and obviously some of these overlap. And there are many other skills that leaders benefit from having. So don't throw them. What will happen, the absence of these skills will impact them all year, but it's somewhat hidden in the everyday work. Putting someone in an appraisal situation without these skills will absolutely throw a spotlight on them and really show it up. Now, before we move on to the final 6, I want to talk to you, and I've deliberately put this after that one about developing skills, because there are some ways to do that, and most of them will cost you nothing, at least when you work with us. So the first is to encourage people to listen to our podcast. We talk a lot about skills, but we also talk a lot about attitudes towards leadership and developing people. If you've got people who prefer to read rather than hear, our blog has many articles on leadership, so they can go through the backlog, and we're always adding to that. And we have some free resources, and the link to those is on the slide there. Some free resources around developing teams, around managing performance, etc. One final one, and this is the only one that I'm going to show you that has a cost associated with it, and these are our online workshops. And we have one a month, a 3-hour online workshop on a leadership topic, and many of our attendees actually enrol in a full 6-month program, which also includes some individual coaching. So there's a lot of options there to develop the skills that we can offer, and you've probably got some strategies internally as well. On to mistake number 10. And this is a lack of structure. And now I'm starting to move into the actual appraisal conversation. So I believe that you should have a structured conversation. It should be, and I think those two words are really important, structured but conversation. So it's not a regimented discussion that you do by the book. But there's got to be some sort of flow to make sure you cover everything, and most times you can sort of move through this flow. And I do like to start out with questions that they don't expect in an appraisal. Are you happy at work? And get them relaxed, having a conversation. How am I going as your leader? So make it really clear that this is a two-way feedback process. And then through some of those more expected ones. How do you feel you're going? What are you doing well? What could you improve or develop? What will you work on in the next year? Or it might be 3 months or 6 months. You come up with your own structure, but I really like that sort of approach. We also might have in there some really specific measures that we work through as part of, around that third and fourth and fifth question. Mistake number 11 is you do all the talking. If you're talking all the time, then it's a lecture. If they're talking, it's a developmental process. So aim for that 70-30 balance, 2/3 you, them talking, 1/3 you. And of course, the way to do that is to make sure you're asking great questions to guide the conversation and to invite them to participate. Mistake number 12 is the feedback being all the notes that you've made about them. And I believe that a feedback process should largely come from themselves. And that's because you invite that reflection during the appraisal with great questions by listening and by asking follow-up questions. But of course, there should be some feedback from you. There should be some stuff from their peers that you've picked up that they're either doing really well or they're putting noses out of joint, or sometimes they make mistakes in this area. And critically, so critically, if they're a person in a management position, a supervisory position, some of the feedback should come from the people they manage. So while I believe everyone should do appraisals, I like to start, instead of cascading down, I like to cascade up. So as I work through appraisals with a manager, I've already heard some feedback, or they've already heard some feedback from the people they've done appraisals for, which can now be reflected in their own discussion. Mistake number 13 is also around that feedback, and this is over-obsessing with agreement. There are times where people will not agree with the feedback, and it's okay to discuss that, but don't back away from it because they don't agree with it, or don't over-force it because they don't agree with it. A really solid position to come to is, I accept that you don't necessarily agree with this, but I still need you to act on it. I accept that you don't really see that sometimes you can upset people with your style, but that's how it's impacting them, and I do expect you to act on it and will form part of your development plan. So don't worry if they don't agree. I'm much more worried if they don't act. Mistake number 14, this is the absolute crux of the whole thing. There is no point doing an appraisal unless it results in a development plan. And that development plan should reflect the feedback from all sources. So from themselves, things you would like them to work on, things that you've heard from their peers or they've heard from their peers, and critically, if they're in that leadership role, feedback from their team members. And this is the stuff that they're going to work on. This is not the stuff they've done well in the last 12 months. This is the stuff they either haven't done well, or maybe there's just the stuff, the areas they want to grow. And this hurts me as a training professional, but please don't overemphasize training in this process. The focus should be on development through many channels, which could be on-the-job learning, which could be coaching from you, which could be mentoring from a colleague, and yes, could be around formal training through an organisation like ours. And make sure the focus is on both task and team and cultural. And the final one is no follow-up. If you put this in the bottom drawer and forget about it for 12 months, that's too late. Too much time has elapsed, and it conveys the message we're not serious about the development. So go all the way back to the previous tip about having regular off-the-job catch-ups, a great time to say, hey, let's just have a chat about some of those things on the development plan. How are you going with them? Oh, you've done well on that one. Well done. What else can we work on then? Or, okay, you're struggling with that one. What do we need to change? And a really good thing to ask at that time is, how am I going on the things that you talked to me about and that I took on in my own development plan? There have to be consequences for acting. People have to know that you see and that you appreciate it and you congratulate them. There also have to be consequences for someone who is failing to act. So that's the end of the 15 tips. Please, it would mean so much to us if you would take 30 seconds to scan that barcode and scan that, I've gone blank, but I'm going to call it a barcode, and leave a quick review. Stars are lovely. A couple of words, one sentence carries so much weight. Would really appreciate it. We'll see you in the next Plenty in 20.